welcome to Getting Baked with Huscoon, and this isn't about, joints or anything, as the title may suggest. This is about, getting good in the kitchen. So a little bit about me. For those of you who do not know me, I've been cooking and baking pretty religiously for the past 5 years. I began working more in the kitchen very much when I was younger. My mom always did a thing where she would send out Christmas cookies to all of our friends and family every December, and I always got to help her with that, and that was really my first experience. My dad's an avid griller, but granted, living in a small Chicago apartment, grilling is not really an option unless I go out to the park. So that I never really picked up on. But baking, when I was younger, about 5 years ago, I had friends over all the time, especially here in Chicago where we would have monthly softball meets. And being one of the few people who was willing to host more people than I really ever should have, I like to, be a host and cook for people, especially people who didn't have the resources that I did, financially speaking. Because if you go somewhere for a weekend and you're going out to eat for breakfast and lunch and dinner all weekend, that adds up quickly. So to try to save my friends some money, I would always try to at least do a couple of meals at my apartment here. And it was usually something simple like breakfast, but even that can save you $15 a meal, or, in Canadian, like $45 a meal. So that was really how I got started, was just doing a lot of breakfast foods and a lot of cookies about 5 or 6 years ago, and I've really started to increase my repertoire, and I want to share that with everybody today with 3 of my very favorite meals, one for breakfast, one for dinner, and one for dessert. So without further ado, let's get into those. So the first dish I'm going to make is going to be our breakfast dish, and like everything you're going to see here, this dish is something that's going to take at least 24 hours. It may not at least 24 hours, but it's something that you need to prep the day before. And with anything good, you're going to want to do some kind of prep. There are a couple things that you can make right off the fly, but once you get to a certain level, you definitely want to start prepping things, sometimes days in advance, which we'll never get into that, at least so long as I'm doing this, because that's kind of crazy. But with cinnamon rolls, you don't, unless you want to wake up at 4 in the morning, which I know you don't, you want to do some prep the day before, but it is so well worth it. And once you get good at it, people will request these for more than just breakfast. I mean, you can have them for breakfast, lunch, supper, dessert, or just as a snack. So let's get started on those. So here are the ingredients that you are going to need for some of the best cinnamon rolls you're going to have. You have whole milk, granulated sugar, butter, active dry yeast. This is an important one. All-purpose flour, ground cinnamon, dark brown sugar, baking powder. I know I showed baking soda here. You want baking powder, not baking soda. That's important. Sea salt. You'll see some dental floss. Don't worry, you're not going to be eating that, so you'll be just fine. So what you're going to want to start off with is warm milk. So to do this, very simple, just put it in a measuring cup, put your 2 cups of whole milk in a measuring cup, put it in the microwave, probably for about 1.5 minutes. That's going to give you a good amount of time. The key is, and you're going to see it right here, you want to get the temperature of the whole milk up to between 100 and 110 degrees Fahrenheit, but you're going to want this milk in that 100 to 110 Fahrenheit range. At this range, because we're going to be putting the yeast in here, that's when your yeast is going to be the most active. If the milk is too cold, what's going to happen is that the yeast is just not going to bloom. If the milk is too hot, so if it gets over 140 Fahrenheit, it will kill the yeast and it'll be useless. So what we're doing now is we are going to put our melted butter in there, and we're just going to give it a good mix just to try to incorporate it. And then we are going to add our 1/2 cup of sugar. I know it says 110 grams. I have my reasons for putting it that way, but 110 grams or 1/2 cup of granulated sugar. And once it's all mixed together, we are going to add our yeast. So with the yeast, what you want to do is just cut it open and sprinkle it on top. You don't want to dump the whole thing in there. Sprinkle it, give it a good mix, and just let it set. Let it set. Don't mix with it too much, because this is where our yeast is going to bloom. So as you can see right here, our yeast is looking pretty funky, and that's perfect. This is exactly what we want our buttermilk sugar yeast mixture to look like. If it doesn't look like this, start over. Don't even move forward, because at this point you know the yeast is either dead or it's just not working like it should. Now this is the most important part, because if you don't have the yeast development, if you don't have the bloom, and you go forward, your cinnamon rolls are going to turn out flat, they're going to turn out dense, and the last thing we want are dense cinnamon rolls. So what we've got here is our 500 grams, or about 4 cups of flour. And what we're going to do is just pour the butter yeast mixture right in, and then take our wooden spoon and mix it all and just incorporate it. We don't need to make it thorough. We just need to make sure that every bit of flour is covered in the milk butter yeast mixture. And that's it. It doesn't have to be perfectly blended. We're going to cover it, and then we're just going to let it set. It's going to set for 1 hour. And you want to do this so that you can give the yeast time to do its magic. And it truly is, unless you are, some kind of scientist. It feels like magic. But what it's doing is it's getting a lot of carbon dioxide in there. It's burping up that carbon dioxide to make your dough big and poofy. From here, while our dough is getting bigger, we are going to make our filling. So the filling is going to be simple. It's going to be butter, cinnamon, and dark brown sugar. So I'm going to use a measuring cup, and the reason I like using measuring cups, even though it doesn't really serve that much of a purpose, or its intended purpose, is because of the tall sides that it has, and it allows me to mix with more vigor, and so I don't have stuff ending up all over the place, which happens anyway. So we've got our 3/4 of a cup of butter. We're going to add our 2 tablespoons of ground cinnamon and our 3/4 of a cup, or 165 grams of dark brown sugar. Use dark brown sugar. And as you can see, I'm scaling everything. I'm getting I got my kitchen scale. I think it's easier to use than packing down brown sugar, because if you do that, you're going to get some inconsistencies. It's not too important with something like a filling, but when you get into more sensitive baking, it does become much more important, especially when you're working with cookies, where the amount of flour could be the difference between a flat, crispy cookie and one that just domes and tastes like nothing. So we're just going to mix these together, make it one homogeneous mixture filling, and that's going to be good, and we're going to set it aside, and we're going to go out and do whatever for the next 45 minutes or an hour. Now, as you can see, our dough rose significantly. So what we're going to do now is we're going to add another cup of flour, about 125 grams. We're going to add a teaspoon of baking powder to give it a little bit more rise, and we're going to add 2 teaspoons of sea salt. You can use kosher salt. It's not going to make it salty, it's just going to add some flavor. Now we're going to pour out the dough, and it's going to be kind of scraggly at this point. And we're going to pour it out onto a floured surface. Very important, because if you don't flour the surface, the dough is going to stick to the surface. And at this point, get our bench flour, and we are just going to knead and knead and knead and knead for good 10-15 minutes at least. Now, if you have a stand mixer with a hook attachment, you can use that also. You're not going to break into a sweat if you do it that way, but you do run the risk of over mixing your dough, or over kneading your dough, I should say. If you're doing it just with your hands, first off, take off all jewelry. You saw that I've been working with a watch. Here, I'm not going to work with a watch on. Learned that the hard way a couple of times. And what you're going to want to do is just knead the dough 10-15 minutes until it's a ball. It's not sticking to the surface without the help of flour, and it bounces back at you when you poke your finger into it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to just drop our dough off We're going to resurface the island, the counter, whatever you are using as your workspace, and make sure that you don't have a lot of things in the way, because this boy is going to get big. Lay it out, flour it, get out the rolling pin, and just start working. And what you want this to be is you want it to be fairly thin, but you don't want it to break. If you kneaded it well enough, that's not going to be a problem. And what you're going to want to do is try to keep it into a rectangle shape, as I'm going to do here. And this thing's going to get big, it's going to go off the edge of the screen, and that's perfect. It's exactly what you want. Now what we're going to do, we're going to take the filling that we made earlier, and we're just going to spread it from edge to edge, corner to corner, like this is a thin crust pizza. We're putting sauce on it, and we're just going to go edge to edge. Don't leave a lot of crust on the side, because just like it's the worst part of a pizza, it's going to make for cinnamon rolls that some of them aren't going to have as much filling as others. So edge to edge, don't worry about getting the space dirty, because it's already dirty. Well, dirty as in messy, not dirty as in uncleanly. So what we're going to do now, we've got it completely covered. We're going to roll it up. We're going to turn this sideways, and now we've got our tape measure, because we want 12 even rolls. So we've got 60 centimeters. So hey, look at this. I'm converting to metric for you guys. We've got our 60 centimeters. So that means for 12 rolls, we're going to do 5 centimeters high. We're just going to want to place this out. We're going to want to roll it out and then make our little tick marks every 5 centimeters. So at this point now, this is where the unflavored floss comes in. We're going to grab the floss. We're going to get it under the log there, the cinnamon roll log, and we're just going to wrap it around and pinch it, and that's how we're going to cut all these. So what you're going to see now is I've got 3 pans. These are 8x8 pans that I have already put non-stick spray on, and some people would swear to butter. I don't think it makes that big of a difference. Personally, put the non-stick spray so you're able to get them out of the pan. And as you see, there seems to be a lot of room in there. I could probably fit 9 in each one of these. But you don't want to do this, because as I said earlier, you want you want to give these things room to grow, because a dense cinnamon roll is a bad one. So as we wrap these up in cling wrap, we're going to put them in the freezer, and we are going to just leave them there until we need them, which frankly for me is going to be tomorrow. So what I've done here is, before I went to bed last night, I took one of these pans out of the freezer. I put it on the counter. Doesn't really matter where. You can put it in a warm place, but it gives it a chance to, so you don't have to defrost it in the morning. It gives it a chance to proof and rise overnight, and that way you can just preheat the oven and pop them in. Look how big this is, and look how big it is compared to, as I bring another pan in from what was frozen. Look how much bigger that is. And it's gonna get even bigger. So we popped it into the oven at 350 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're gonna leave them in there for 25 minutes. In the meantime, let's talk about the icing. So the icing is pretty simple. We've got powdered sugar, we've got clear vanilla extract. Now, and we've got milk. You can add butter and cream cheese if you want a cream cheese icing. I like vanilla, and I'm using the clear because it's just for looks. If you use pure vanilla extract, which big fan of, this is the only time I use clear, is it's going to give it a much whiter, brighter appearance, and it's just going to look better. But if you're more into just the pure taste, go ahead and use good old pure vanilla extract. So the making of the icing is very simple. We're going to put our vanilla and our milk into a small bowl, and we are going to slowly add the powdered sugar until we get a consistency that we are happy with. I know the recipe calls for 2 cups of powdered sugar, and that's a good baseline. That's probably what you're going to expect to use. But if you want thicker icing, you can use more, or you can use less milk. Really up to you. This would be my recommendation, though, is about 2 cups of powdered sugar. And finally, folks, let's see how these things turned out. Oh man, they are amazing. Look how, now, remember how small they were earlier? These things grew. And that's why you don't want to pack them in. You're going to see that with a lot of recipes that tell you to pack them in. Try to get as many as you can. You don't want to do that because breakfast is not supposed to be a heavy meal. Breakfast is supposed to be a light meal. That's why people like eggs, because eggs can be light, fluffy. That's why people like toast for breakfast. And cinnamon rolls should be the exact same way. They should be allowed to expand, allowed to grow. And by also rolling it really thin, look at the layers, and you really can't tell by this camera angle, but it really domes, and that's what you want. These are truly the best cinnamon rolls that I have ever made, and that's because I gave them room to grow. And finally, the icing. Again, if you want to use a cream cheese icing, go right ahead. I use a vanilla icing. And if you want to be fancy, you do it each individually, or you can just put the icing on the whole thing and let your friends grab them. And the great thing about this is with 4 cinnamon rolls, if it's just you and a friend, that's perfect. You're not wasting a bunch of cinnamon rolls, because I've still got 2, and actually they're in my freezer, and they'll probably be in my freezer until I can have friends over again, which may be at this rate 2023. But anyway, these are Huscoon's cinnamon rolls, and these are the best cinnamon rolls that you're going to have. Now, for our dinner recipe, one of my favorite meals, and I shouldn't say one of, because it is absolutely my favorite meal, is chicken Alfredo. Chicken Alfredo can be anything you want it to be. It is hearty, it is savory, it's excellent. Absolutely my favorite meal. When my friends and I, when we go out to any Italian restaurant, you can guarantee I'm going to get chicken Alfredo. Unless it's a place I've been to a million times, Olive Garden. Shouldn't actually be coughing like this in the middle of a pandemic. But it's okay. You can't catch COVID from here through the computer screen. And if you can, we are in a lot of trouble, people. For chicken Alfredo, it's a dish that I order all the time. And after ordering it hundreds of times, I'm sure it's hundreds, like I need to learn how to make this on my own. And I've gone through several recipes. And I'm going to show you guys how to make the best chicken Alfredo. And the key is going to be in the sauce. Chicken, obviously, you don't want to use old raw chicken, or old nasty chicken. The pasta's not going to make that big of a difference. It's kind of just a vessel. The key is the sauce. And so we're going to get started on that right now. So here are the ingredients for my favorite dish, chicken Alfredo. Obviously we have chicken here. That's kind of important when you're making chicken Alfredo. You all also need pasta. I use penne. It really doesn't matter what brand. This is just what I grabbed. Everything else is going into I don't want to say everything else. We also have the grilled meats, garlic, herb, and wine. You may consider that cheating. I don't, because you have to flavor the chicken, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Everything else, you've got your butter, your cream cheese, your heavy whipping cream, your Parmesan cheese, all of your seasonings here, and you also have your white balsamic vinegar, which is going to go with the chicken in the garlic, herbs, and wine seasoning. So what we're going to do with the chicken, that's going to be our first thing, is we need to get a cutting board out. We need to get a sharp knife out. Make sure that you sharpen your knife, and please don't cut your finger off. Some stores are actually going to have chicken breast that you can use that's already sliced. If you can, go ahead and use that. It's not a big deal. I would avoid going with the frozen chicken, though, because that's going to lose a lot of its flavor just from being frozen. So what we're going to do here is we've got our chicken breast laid out, and we are going to just cut it into thin strips. Very simple, nothing too fancy about this, and you want them to be about no more than, the tip of your fingertip to the beginning of your first knuckle. That's about the right size for it, though. So long as it's not too big or too small, you really can't go wrong with the size of the cuts of chicken. Now, what I'm doing here is I'm putting the pieces of chicken into the garlic herb and wine marinade. What's really important here, though, is not really the garlic herb and wine thing. That's my personal preference. The big thing you want to make sure you do, though, is you want to season your chicken. One way or another, you want to season your chicken. Whether you can just do a simple salt and pepper on your chicken, and that will work just fine. You can go really, really fancy and do a Parmesan crusted chicken if you have, 5 hours to do that. That's fine also. The key, though, is do something. All three of these are good suggestions. Whether it's a marinade that has like a wine, garlic herb and wine, you don't want to really go with anything too spicy. You can do a simple salt and pepper. You can do Parmesan crusted. Those all work great, but do something. That's the most important thing, is do something. Now, we've got our Parmesan cheese, and one thing we want to do ahead of time, you want to grate the Parmesan cheese on the box, in the box grater. And you don't have, I used to do it really, really fine so that it melted quicker. It really doesn't make that big of a difference, really. So long as you're not putting an entire block of cheese in there, you're fine. The last thing you want to do, though, the thing that you actually don't want to do at all, is use the prepackaged grated Parmesan cheese, because it has an anti-caking agent in it. And while that really doesn't affect the taste too much, what it does do is it makes it much, much tougher for Parmesan cheese to melt into your Alfredo sauce. And Parmesan cheese already has a very high melting temperature, one of the highest of any kinds of cheese. So you want to eliminate any of those barriers. So just buy the 5-ounce block of cheese, grate it yourself, and then we're going to use that as we get closer to making the Alfredo sauce. All right, but we've got our chicken ready, we've got our cheese ready. It is time to make the Alfredo sauce. Now, when you are making chicken Alfredo, this is where you want to begin. You don't want to make the pasta, and you don't want to make the chicken first, because those can kind of wait, and the sauce is definitely the least time sensitive. So what we're going to begin with is the cream, the heavy whipping cream. And we're just going to bring this up to temperature. Pretty simple. Put it in our saucepan, bring it up to temperature. We're going to add our butter in, because, again, butter has a pretty low melting point, so we can mix that in with the cream, and we're just going to let them kind of combine. Once the butter is completely melted, we're going to add our cream cheese. Now, what you notice is that the cream cheese is in cubes. We want to cut the cream cheese into as small cubes as possible, because it's not, even though it's one of the easier melting cheeses, it's still not that easy. So we want to cut into cubes, put it into the sauce, into the cream, the butter mixture, and just kind of stir it around. You're going to see that I'm going to go from a wooden spoon to a whisk here, because I'm an impatient person. And what you're going to realize quickly is I'm a big fan of using the whisk. Wooden spoon, though, this is going to be important later on, so don't, make sure you have one of these. You can also use a spatula, but make sure it's not a metal spatula. And there's going to be a reason for that here moving forward. Now, once we've got the cream cheese pretty much completely incorporated, pretty much completely melted, we are going to add our seasonings. And you've got minced garlic, you've got garlic powder, you've got Italian seasoning, you have sea salt, and you've got black pepper. And we're just going to add it all at once. Just throw it in there and mix it nice and well. And now that we've brought this whole thing up to a simmer, this is when we want to start adding the Parmesan cheese. And you don't want to add it all at once. It's the same reason you don't want to add all the flour into cookie dough at once, or way back in the day when I was a kid and I loved cream mushroom soup, adding all the milk into the cream mushroom soup at once, because it's not going to combine. So you're going to do this in little handfuls and let the cheese kind of melt before you add more. So now what we're going to do is we're going to introduce our chicken and our pasta. The sauce is pretty much done. What we're going to do is we're going to let it simmer for a little bit. We want the sauce to get thicker. That's the way it's going to hold on to the pasta. More of it's going to hold on to more of the pasta, and it's going to give this whole dish a better flavor. So we're introducing our chicken, and we're just putting this on a skillet. We're going to, you don't see the butter there at the bottom. We have butter there so that, because it's chicken. Even if you have a nonstick pan, use butter, use cooking spray, use something with chicken. And we're going to throw a lot of the marinade in there also. You don't want to go overboard with that. A lot of it's going to cook off depending on what you use. But again, also here, depending on what you're doing, you could also do Parmesan crusted, you can do salt and pepper, whatever floats your boat. Here, we're just going to make sure that the chicken is completely cooked through because this isn't steak. We can't really leave it raw in the middle. And we're just going to cook it through. And once it's done, you can bring it down to a lower heat and kind of set it aside. This is the also very low time sensitive. If it's done before everything else, that's fine. Just take it off the burner and it'll be fine. Next, we've got our pasta. We've got our rolling boil all ready. This is something that you don't see it on camera, but you want to get the water boiling early. That way you're not waiting on it, because depending on how good your range is, it could take a good 15-20 minutes to get your water to a rolling boil. Add salt, don't add oil. That's a piece of advice I've heard from some people. Don't bother with the oil. All it's going to do is it's going to coat the pasta, and unfortunately what that's going to end up doing then is the sauce is not going to stick to the pasta as well. And that's what we want. That's the whole point of the pasta, is to be kind of a vehicle to get the sauce and the chicken, because that's where the flavor is, into your mouth. Simple as that. And now at this point, we're just kind of supervising all three of these. We're turning over the chicken when we need to, we're mixing the sauce when we need to, and we're giving the water, the pasta water, a stir to make sure that you don't have clumps of pasta sticking together. At this point, it's going to be, if you've done everything else right up to this point, it's going to be really tough to screw it up. But one thing you do see here is, look at the wooden spoon, and once you can no longer kind of see the wood in there, that's when you know the sauce is thick enough. If you're still seeing the texture of the wood, the sauce isn't thick enough. And that's the big difference between a really good Alfredo sauce and an excellent Alfredo sauce. So now we've got our chicken, and we're just going to dump the finished pasta into the pan that we were cooking the chicken in. Don't drain the chicken unless there's just a lot of marinade or grease or something in there, but you want to keep that in there because that's going to add flavor. So you've got the chicken, we're going to add the pasta, and we're going to just dump the Alfredo sauce on there. The other way to do this is you can just do an assembly line. You can set up your pasta, your chicken, and your Alfredo sauce, and if it's just you, or if you have friends over, that way if they don't want chicken, they don't have to have chicken. Maybe they're on a vegetarian diet and they don't want the chicken, so you can do the assembly line kind of thing. But if it's just you, or it's not really a big deal, then you can add them all together. Also, one piece of advice when you are making a pasta, meat, and sauce recipe, what the ratios you're going for, because no one ever tells you this kind of stuff, so that's why I'm here. You want about a 2-3-3 ratio. So for every pound of pasta, you want about 24 ounces or a pound and a half of sauce, and about 24 ounces or a pound and a half of meat. Those are the ratios that you're going for to get so that everything balances, so you have enough sauce for your pasta and you have enough meat for your sauce. Meat and sauce should be about the same. Pasta should be a little bit less. And when I was making this, unfortunately, I didn't make enough chicken. The sauce is fine. The sauce is excellent. This was great. Oh man! But knowing what the ratios are is very, very important. And just look at how thick this sauce is. Oh man. Yeah. Okay. This is why diets fail, because you get good at stuff like this. finally, keeping with kind of the Italian theme, well, just the last meal, cinnamon rolls I don't think are really Italian. If they are, that would be a surprise to me. I think they're very much Americana. But for our final dessert, our final meal, which is dessert, we're going to do tiramisu. And this is a dish I just learned how to make probably about 6 to 8 months ago. But it's one that is a hit. Even if you don't like coffee, you are going to love tiramisu. Now, of the three recipes, this is probably the most challenging. I would say all three of these recipes kind of waver in between the novice and intermediate category. So if you're a beginner, if you really want to get into cooking and baking, this may not be the best one for you. But if you've made cookies, if you've made brownies, and you want to, take your dessert to the next level, this is a great recipe to do it with. And if you can find all the ingredients, and that's going to be a challenge for some of you, especially if you live in the middle of nowhere, this is going to be if you don't have that problem, this is going to be a great dessert for you to start with. So let's get started on the tiramisu. And again, before we begin, this is something that you want to do about 24 hours in advance. So if you're looking for tiramisu right now, probably not your best bet, but if you can wait at least 8 hours, this is going to be excellent. All right, finally for the tiramisu, because even though I'm 0% Italian, I love Italian food, and that includes dessert. So what we're going to need here is we're going to need 4 large eggs. We've got our granulated sugar again, and that's going to be divided into 2 even parts. We've got our heavy whipping cream. Starting to notice a pattern here. We've got our mascarpone. We've got our espresso powder, our rum, our lady fingers. Now, some of these things are, well, maybe not the rum, because I know how you people are. You guys will have no problem finding rum. Some of these items are going to be difficult to find. We've also got our cocoa powder and our semi-sweet chocolate bar. So what we're going to do is we are going to bring 3 cups of water to a boil. Very simple. You can do this in a saucepan. You can do it in the microwave. Microwave is much easier, in my opinion. You are going to want a large measuring cup for this. If you don't have a large measuring cup, you can still get away with by using a medium-sized saucepan. Either way, you want something with tall edges, and you're going to see why here. But bring 3 cups of water to a boil. And then once we are done with that, what we are going to do is we are going to add 1/4 of a cup of espresso powder. If you want to get really fancy, you can just make espresso here. You can make essentially 3 1/4 cups of espresso. This is a lot easier though, and you don't have to have an espresso machine for it. And you can add your 1/4 of a cup of rum, which I'm sure none of you are going to have a problem finding rum. Now we're going to give this a good stir, and we're just going to set it aside. You want the water to be hot so that you don't have the granules of the espresso powder, and you want to do this first. Trust me, you want to do this first. So set that aside, and now we're going to get to the actual cream. So we've got our 4 eggs, and we just want the yolks. So we're going to crack them, and you've all probably done the crack the egg in half and dip it between the yolk between the 2, and that's fine. I just like to use my fingers. I think it's a lot easier, if not messier, and then just put them in the bowl, and it'll be fine. Then we're going to add our half of the granulated sugar, so it's actually about 1/4 of a cup. So don't put a half cup in here. That's going to make it really, really sweet. And then using our mixer, we're just going to beat the living heck out of this until it about triples in volume and we get this very pale yellow color. Once that is done, we are going to transfer this from our small bowl into a larger bowl. You could just make this in the larger bowl or the medium-sized bowl. You could do that, but this is just, I don't know. It's the way I learned it. Now, again, in a smaller bowl, what we're going to do is we're going to make whipped cream. That's essentially what this is. We're going to get our heavy whipping cream, we're going to get our sugar, and we're going to get our hand mixer, and we're just going to, you can use a whisk also. Granted, you need to have arms the size of Hercules to get through this, or just be experienced in the kitchen. And we are just going to make whipped cream. And you're going to be able to tell because it's going to go from a liquid, and by incorporating a bunch of air into it, it is going to kind of turn into a semi-solid, kind of like the consistency of pudding. Maybe a little more solid than that, and that's when you're going to know that you're done. So it's going to bring in all this air, the sugar, the cream. It's going to become truly whipped cream. Now, at this point, we've got our mascarpone. Remember with mascarpone that you do not want to touch this until it is ready to use. So you get it out of the, you can have it at room temperature, shortly beforehand, but you don't want to leave it out overnight or anything like that. Open it up, take off the seal, and put it right in. And you are going to get out the hand mixer again and incorporate everything completely until you've got this really nice spreadable mixture. Now, next part. Take this with the egg mixture from earlier, and you're going to fold the two in this medium-sized bowl. This is going to be the custard. This is going to be not the most important part of the tiramisu, but this can be make or break. If it's too runny or too thick, it won't solidify, and you're going to have a mess. It almost can't be too solid, but I mean, I've never run into that issue personally, but I've had run into it where it's been too watery or too runny. So make sure that you have a pretty solid foundation. And when you're mixing it, you're going to do slow, gentle folding. You've already incorporated a lot of air into this mixture, so you just need to fold it in on itself. Now we are done with the custard. It is time to assemble. So first thing, we've got our 8x8 pan. Doesn't really matter what you use here. I like using a glass pan with high edges. Gives for a nice, more even shape when I do decide to, once I am able to cut into the tiramisu. First thing I'm going to do, get out this teeny tiny little sifter, and we're going to put cocoa powder in there, and we're just going to coat the bottom of it. It doesn't have to be a thick layer. Thick layer isn't going to be a problem because this stuff's going to get wet when it's all said and done. But you want to coat the bottom layer, and it's going to just give it a little bit of an extra chocolatey flavor, and it's going to be able to separate from the pan when you are done. Now we've got our ladyfingers, and we've got our espresso from earlier. Now this has been sitting for a couple of minutes. It should have cooled down from when it was boiling earlier. And again, this is why I want you to do this first, because if this is too hot, you're going to burn the tips of your fingers, because this is the most delicate part of the recipe. And this can truly make or break your recipe, and I know I have ruined tiramisu enough times in my life. Now, since you're working with ladyfingers are very porous. They're very light and porous. So if you dip them into any kind of liquid, like espresso, they are going to soak it up very quickly. So as you see here, I'm just going to dip it in and pull it right back out. Barely even a second, and then I'm going to align all of these in to try and get as many ladyfingers in this bottom layer as humanly possible. And from here, I'm going to add half of our custard and just try to even it out using the spatula. This isn't really, at this point, it's an art. You want to go for as close to half as you can. If you're a little over or a little under, it's okay. I would prefer that you be a little bit over. Again, just to keep the espresso soaked ladyfingers further from the bottom, so they have further to get to. Because if you can leave a pool of espresso at the bottom, and it just makes for a bad tiramisu. That's the biggest mistake that you can make with tiramisu. All right, and we're going to do this all over again. We're going to do the ladyfingers in the espresso on top of the custard, and then we're going to do the rest of the custard on top of the ladyfingers. Pretty simple. So we've got cocoa powder, ladyfingers, custard, ladyfingers, custard, another layer of cocoa powder. And then finally, to top it all off, we've got our semi-sweet chocolate, and we've chopped it as fine as it'll go. I used to do the ribbons, and I think it's great, but I would rather chop it very finely and then dust it over the top of it. what it does when you do that is it adds a whole new layer of flavor, because semi-sweet chocolate is a lot sweeter than the cocoa powder that we have on there. And it adds a little bit of a crunch to it also, which is a wonderful contrast to the soft bite that you get into the tiramisu. And I think it is excellent. Now, what you're going to do with all of this, if you don't have a lid for your 8x8 pan, you can always just use plastic wrap, cover it, and leave it in the fridge for at least overnight, preferably 24 hours. I would say minimum 8 hours. That's it. That is tiramisu. That is a very popular, one of the best Italian desserts that you can make. It is something that if you have foresight, if you know you're going to have people over the next day, you can make it, and it is just an excellent dessert, and something that a lot of people have never had. And then once they have it, and once you're the person who made it, they'll remember you for this. So I know I said that we were going to do 3 recipes today, but the higher ups at Furray were like, no, this video length is all wrong. It's too short for the long panels, and too long for the short panels. So either take out a recipe or add one. Like, okay, fine, I can do that. That's not a problem. So you guys are getting a 4th recipe. 4. So you can thank me later. So we're going to go to a classic that is a favorite, not of my friends, but of my family. So let's get right to it. And let's talk about that final recipe for this video. You're going to need powdered sugar, and you're going to need a lot of it. Creamy peanut butter. Now, you can use crunchy or extra crunchy or whatever, but creamy peanut butter is going to be more of a crowd pleaser. If you're going to do crunchy peanut butter, make sure you have some creamy peanut butter ones also. You can do both, or if you're just making them for yourself because you're the only one who wants them, then you can have extra crunchy. But I would strongly recommend that you use creamy peanut butter. You're also going to need a half stick of butter. You're going to need vanilla extract, sea salt. Again, you can use kosher salt so long as it's fine. All this is going to do is bring out the taste. And semi-sweet chocolate. This time we have the bag of chocolate, and there's going to be a reason for that. We'll go over it here shortly. So one thing I forgot to do in this video is show you that before you do anything, you want to get a baking sheet or anything that's really flat that can go in the freezer and line it with parchment paper and just set it aside. So let's get to the actual food part of it though. We've got a medium-sized mixing bowl here, and we are going to put our half stick of melted butter right in there. Next, we've got our powdered sugar. We want to put that in there, the entire 1 3/4 cup all at once. You really don't need to combine it slowly like you usually do with powdered sugar, not in this case. Next up is the peanut butter, and this is going to be the most important part. This is where the flavor is going to come in, and this is how we are going to get that Reese's Cup-like taste for these Buckeyes. Then we're going to put the vanilla in there, and we're going to finish it off with the sea salt. And obviously we're not putting a bunch of those in there. A little bit of vanilla extract goes a long way. Same with sea salt. Don't need a ton of it, just a little bit of it to bring out the peanut butter flavor. And it really is going to enhance the peanut butter flavor in these Buckeyes. Now, what a lot of people do when they're making these is they'll go in with a spatula and just combine everything that way. There's really no need to work so slowly. You can get out the hand mixer as I'm doing here and use that to bring everything together. It's going to be faster. This isn't a recipe that requires a lot of air to be brought into the mixture. And it's not going to stick to the beaters. There's really no reason to work so slowly with a spatula. So we're just going to use a hand mixer, make life a little bit easier on ourselves. Once everything's mixed together and incorporated, we're just going to take the little peanut butter ball, and we're going to put it onto some plastic wrap and wrap it in pretty tightly. We don't want to get a bunch of air into it. And what I am doing this for is I want to weigh this. I want to have 24 even Buckeye balls to make, so I know exactly how many I'm getting. Now, you don't have to do this. Another way to do this is get a cookie scoop, a melon baller, something along those lines, or you can just get a good old tablespoon, and that's going to work just fine. But I'm pretty pedantic. I want exact measurements, so I'm going to make sure that each and every one of the Buckeye balls is about the same weight. Yeah, I know, I'm weird. And from here, I'm just going to, I know exactly how much each one should be. I think it'd end up being about 18 grams per Buckeye ball, and that should be consistent if you would recreate this recipe per the instructions on the video. And you should, if you're going to make 24, that should be about what each one is. And they're going to be about a tablespoon of peanut butter mixture each. But let's fast forward through this. This is the most exciting part. So what you're going to need now is you're going to need your toothpicks. Obviously one for each Buckeye. Makes sense. And we are going to stab each and every one of them. And we've got our parchment paper lined up on a small baking sheet. Again, you don't need to use a baking sheet. You can use a cutting board. You can use a book if you want to, so long as it's flat and it can go in the freezer. I've never tried putting a book in the freezer, but you know, there's a first time for everything. So we're just going to stab each and every one, and we are going to take this tray and we're going to put it in the freezer for about 15 minutes. Now, while we wait on the Buckeyes or the peanut butter balls to get frozen, we are going to make our chocolate dip. Now, a lot of people use a double boiler, and if you're a fan of the double boiler, go right ahead. That's all you, and I think it is an excellent method. For those of us who, I don't want to say like to have a little more control of our heat, but have the proper equipment, you can actually just use a small saucepan and put your range on the lowest heat possible, and it should work just fine. So we've got our 12-ounce bag of semi-sweet chocolate. If you want to use milk chocolate, you can. For me, that's a little bit too sweet. If you want to use bittersweet or extra dark chocolate, you can use that, but again, that's a little bit too dark for me. Semi-sweet is the perfect compromise between the two. So we're going to put that into the saucepan on the lowest heat possible, and we are just going to let it sit for a little bit, and then we are going to stir and stir and stir and stir. And because chocolate has such a low melting temperature, just the stirring, getting everything to touch each other and keeping it moving is going to prevent it from burning. Now that the chocolate is completely melted, we've got our Buckeyes. They are frozen solid, and that's perfect. What you're going to want to do, just take the saucepan, take it off the heat, put it onto an oven mitt, any surface where the surface will be safe, and we're just going to dip the Buckeye right in about 3/4 of the way, give it a twist, pull it up with the toothpick between us and the Buckeye. Actually, of course it's going to be, but the Buckeye at the highest point, let the little tail fall onto itself, and then put it right back onto the tray. And we're going to do this for all 24 of them, kind of scooping and moving around the chocolate as need be. But the chocolate should stay liquefied throughout the entire process, and about 12 ounces is going to be perfect for 24 Buckeyes. And finally, and this is an optional step, but I like to do it because I like it. It looks better. It looks better. What you're going to want to do is you've got to take the toothpick out. You could serve them with the toothpick on, but that'd be kind of weird to be a little bit fancy for us Ohioans. So what you're going to do, you're going to use 2 other toothpicks, hold down the Buckeye, pull it out slowly, and then you can use the toothpick to fill in the little hole that the toothpick left. And you do that for all 24 of them, and voila, you have got yourself Buckeyes, which it's a very easy dessert, very simple to make, and it will be a crowd pleaser. And I know that unless you have peanut allergies, you are going to love them. Well, guys and gals, I hope you learned a lot. I hope you had fun, getting to see how all of this is made. Cooking and baking are so rewarding. It's a skill that is applicable to everyday life also, as opposed to like calculus, which I'm also good at. But baking and cooking are something that you can carry with you and you can improve on every day, and you have to eat. You absolutely have to eat. And I'm looking at some of you programmers out there. Yes, even you have to eat. But you do need to eat. And so if you're going to eat, you might as well make it something good. Or you can make it something that's okay, but very, very healthy. And that's something that, getting familiar with seasonings and spices can really, really help with. So my advice to you, for people who are just getting started or who haven't started, but want to get into baking and cooking, start simple. These 3 recipes may not be the best for you, but go ahead and give them a shot. I can look back at some of the things I was making 5, 6, 7 years ago now, and I'm like, man, that stuff was bad. Why did my friends tolerate that? I've made some bad pizzas, I've made bad cookies, I've made bad everything. I've made bad French toast. But you get better. It's like anything else. And some people get this idea that all you have to do with cooking is just read the recipe, and it's not that simple. There's so much nuance, especially when you get into baking, that it takes a little bit of time to get used to understand what all the ingredients are doing and how they're working together. And that's going to be the key. That's what you're going to learn when you start trying your own recipes, when you start with cookies, when you start with brownies, when you start with making simple things, even French toast, pancakes, grilled cheese sandwiches, all excellent meals, all worth trying your hand at once in a while. And especially if you live by yourself, the only person who's going to suffer is you. So I would strongly recommend, trying something new. Try to bake something or cook something that you haven't before and see how it turns out. It's very difficult if you're by yourself, but it's worth the time. It's worth the effort, and it improves your self-confidence when you don't have to go to a McDonald's or you don't have to go to a restaurant. Sometimes you can't go to a restaurant for food when you can you can do something a little bit more elaborate than make a bowl of cereal for breakfast. It really does improve your self-confidence. It really does, and it's going to build on itself as you get better. And then people come over and they're like, hey, can you make this today? And you're like, yeah, that takes 2 days to make. Maybe you should have told me earlier. But it is so much fun. It's something that it's a skill that I've developed over the past 5 years, and one that I'm really glad that I did. And what I want you guys to take away from this, instead of just watching another video where someone else cooks, take the initiative to go out and try it yourself. I know sometimes it's fun to watch good food be made, but it's even more fun and more rewarding when you do it yourself and you develop that skill so that you can be that person who makes food for other people and you can make them feel good. This is Huscoon. Thank you for watching and have a great holiday.